The NHL Conference Finals continue, and the Florida Panthers are one win away from returning to the Stanley Cup Final. We'll cover both series, plus we have our women's hockey spotlight, all that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I'm Gil Martin. I'm here every Friday with Rachel Donner. And Rachel, one team is now one win away from the Stanley Cup Final.
Yeah, the Florida Panthers continue to impress. I would say, the last two games, watching what they do against this New York Rangers team to virtually shut them down and have almost no offensive zone time. It is a sight to behold. It's just that, when you have Shesterkin in net on the other end, sometimes you can't score the goals yourself to put them away convincingly. And I think that's been the story here.
Yeah, I mean, in a losing effort, Shesterkin making 34 saves in this game, keeping the Rangers in it. Second game in a row that has happened. And yet it's almost like at times a defensive clinic being put on by the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, it is just tremendous. And you see every time the Rangers try and take it up the ice, there is a solution there that the Panthers have in place, whether it's just completely shutting them down in the neutral zone, driving them to the outside and stealing the puck away. And this Florida defensive structure is just so incredibly impressive.
And they do such a good job of executing it as well. And it really, the Rangers are a team with speed and talent. You've got, Artemi Panarin and Mika Zibanejad and Alex Lafreniere. You've got players, Chris Kreider, who can put the puck in the net, and they're just not being allowed to really get their game going offensively.
Yeah, I think, that has been the big part of it, is that it's a defense first kind of team. And you look at the victories for the Florida Panthers in this series, so far in the 3 wins, they've scored 3 goals in each one of these. And I just think that, that is the goal in every game, pretty much. You win 3 goals, you score 3 goals, you get the best chance of winning the game. And they've had to scrounge for those 3 goals. And it has not been an easy task for them either.
No, hasn't been easy. And obviously, as we said, Shesterkin has done a good job of keeping the Rangers in some games they probably don't deserve to be in. But, now the Rangers have a tough task because they are heading back down to South Florida to try to extend this series. What does the team have to do differently in Game 6 to have a chance to extend the series and bring it back to MSG for Game 7?
Yeah, it is interesting because, a lot of people have pointed out the fact that going to a Florida Panthers game could be a New York Rangers game, given the volume of transplants that live in Florida now, and the Rangers contingent is very large in South Florida. So, it could feel somewhat like a home game for the Rangers down there, but there is something different between the arena down there and Madison Square Garden. And but with Florida being such a good team on the road, I think that, I don't think that matters ultimately in this series at all. I think that it's really just a game by game war of attrition here between these two teams, and who makes the least worst mistake that causes that one goal that sends it over the top. I mean, other than game 1, every single game has been a 1-goal game.
Yeah.
3 of the 5 games have gone to overtime. So, home, road, I don't think that matters here.
And yeah, 3 of the 5 games go to overtime. We had an empty net goal last night, even though it didn't go to overtime. So, this series has been very, very tight. And I guess that's more likely to happen in a low scoring series.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. So I think that, the Rangers just really have to do something to combat this defensive structure of Florida in order to get back into it.
Yeah, and I sort of wonder, Adam Fox is kind of playing through some injuries. If he was fully healthy, how much would that help the Rangers in their transition game?
I mean, it could. I will counter that by saying every team is playing with injuries
Yes.
likely at this point. So it's hard to use. It could be an explanation, but not an excuse, as they say. And I feel like if the Rangers are depending this heavily on Adam Fox, they don't have the depth in order to win anyway. I feel like that's really the bottom line here.
And I think depth is something that Florida has as an advantage in this
Yeah.
series. I think that, maybe the Rangers have a little bit more top talent, but I think the depth favors Florida, and the way they're playing right now, they're taking advantage of that.
Yeah, this is a very special team, and I think that, you look at what like the growth of this team over the past several years, and I think that, it is this time different than the past several years. I don't know, but this team feels different to me.
It does, and they feel like a team on a mission, and we'll see whether or not, look, last year they were in the Cup final. They are
Yeah.
one win away from getting back there and then trying to take that last step and win their first ever Stanley Cup. We'll see if they can do it, or whether the Rangers will force a game 7. Should be an exciting series, and we'll see whether we know who, one of the teams are by the end of this weekend. Some news out of Seattle as well. And we were talking about Seattle a little bit last week, and here we are. Dan Bilesma, now the coach, and some talk that the Kraken could be hiring the first ever women's assistant coach in the NHL.
Yeah, and Jessica Campbell was part of the Coachella Valley Firebirds coaching staff with Dan Bilesma. And so, to some degree, it would make sense for her to transition up to the NHL with him because that team has been so successful, and you don't want to break what's working, right? And she has such a tremendous track record, and I think that it is beyond time that there has been a woman in a full-time coaching role at the NHL level.
Well, we will keep an eye on that and see whether or not it happens now for the first time. It would certainly be groundbreaking, and hopefully we'll get an announcement on that soon. Meanwhile, the NHL announcing the winner of the Lady Byng Trophy for gentlemanly play and sportsmanship. And for the second time in 4 years, it is Carolina Hurricanes defenseman Jacob Slavin, beating out Elias Pettersson of the Canucks and Austin Matthews of the Maple Leafs. Your thoughts on Slavin winning the Lady Byng?
I mean, that's fine. It's not an award that I think, to me, has a huge amount of significance. I've always thought it's weird that Austin Matthews gets nominated for this, but I've got no issue with Jacob Slavin, so congrats to him. But yeah, I think that uh, it has been interesting to watch, I guess, this award develop a little bit and change a little bit where, it's not just the least amount of penalty minutes. Like
Right.
you have to score as well, and you have to be, part of the offense and put yourself out there. It's, in order to be a contender. So I do like that aspect of it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's been moving in the right direction. Well, we have got a lot more to discuss on today's show. Erica L. Ayala will join us for our women's hockey spotlight. Plus, we'll talk about the other playoff series between the Oilers and the Stars. And we have a schedule for the Stanley Cup Finals. All of that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
The NBA and NHL playoffs are approaching the finals, and it would be incredible to be there in person. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting those tickets even faster and easier, so you can make that dream come true. And prices on the Game Time app actually playoff seats, MLB tickets in your town, and more. My favorite part of the Game Time app is that it's great for getting notified about those last-minute flash deals, and Game Time lets you save even more with zone deals, where you pick a section and let Game Time choose the seat for you. Best of all, they have all-in pricing, so there's no surprise fees at checkout, and your tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through email. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create account, redeem with the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
It is now time for our bi-weekly women's hockey spotlight. That means we welcome back Erica L. Ayala. And Erica, we have a first Walter Cup champion.
Yes, indeed. It is the PWHL Minnesota team that once again, Minnesota has this history, Rachel, of coming into a new league, being like, hey, we're the new kids on the block, and then taking the trophy. They've claimed the Clarkson Cup. They've claimed the Isabel Cup, and now they have the Walter Cup.
I know. It's so crazy that this pattern has continued.
I guess that's why they call it the state of hockey, Gil.
Yeah, no question. Minnesota has a great hockey tradition, and now this adds to it. And congratulations, obviously, to Minnesota.
Yes, indeed. And, I Rachel, you can mute yourself if you need to for this, but also congratulations to Boston. They did we know how I feel about that city, but they did push the series to 5 games. We had some pretty close contests, including a double overtime where Boston again pushed the issue on that game 4 on Sunday, May 26th. But ultimately, Minnesota was the victor. And, I want to talk about a narrative that was very much a part of the celebration. And I'm a little bit torn about it, Rachel. And that is Kendall Coyne-Schofield, kind of heralded as a champion here, definitely leaned into this season coming back as a mom. And we kind of hear the thing about like dad power in hockey, right? After a player comes back, after they have their first child or a child. This is something in sports that it is difficult to come back from, just in life, probably. I cannot say, I've never given birth, but having a child, it's a lot. And then taking care of a child is a lot. And then doing that while playing professional hockey is a lot. And I feel like we've held up that part of Kendall Coyne-Schofield's legacy maybe a little bit more than the fact that she was one of the pioneering players to advocate for what we now see as the PWHL. Rachel, what are your thoughts overall on that?
I don't know, like, was her kid crying in the cup symbolic of all that? Who can say? But that being said, I think that especially because she was part of that NWHL/PHF team in Minnesota that won the Isabel Cup as well. Like, her legacy in hockey is so tremendous, and to reduce her, reduce is maybe the wrong word, but to simplify her,
yes,
as a mom, I think is a disservice to her as a leader in this game.
Yeah. And I mean, sound bites and social media post Gil are only going to give you a little bit of that. And I don't want to diminish the fact that, again, we live in a society where we're not far removed. You can look at Allison Felix. You can look at Candace Parker. You can look at so many examples of women who felt, just in sports, this is not even talking about in other industries, Gil, where women do feel that once they become a mother and they make that choice to just, take on motherhood in any form, whether they gave birth to a child or not, that does impact their earning potential.
Yeah, I mean, that is still an issue in our society today. And we have made progress over my mother's generation, my grandmother's generation, but there's still more that needs to be done. And it is still an issue.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I'm very curious to see, how this team is immortalized beyond just that and the snapshots that we're getting, which includes, of course, Taylor Heise, who becomes the first ever MVP of the playoffs. And Taylor had an interesting journey. Rachel was the number 1 overall pick to Minnesota, but then was in and out of the lineup for a while, I believe,
Right.
including in the playoffs due to some injuries. So, what did you see from Heise? And maybe another storyline that we've been seeing a flutter was there another player that perhaps had an outstanding performance that also should have been recognized?
Yeah, I think, you can't deny that Taylor Heise made an incredible impact on this season overall. And she was tied for the lead in points in the playoffs. She played, the full 10 games that Minnesota played. But I think, she was tied with her teammate, Michelle Cava, first off, in point totals, just having one more goal than her. And I think that this is just one of those prime examples where I felt like from an offensive perspective in Minnesota, it was more of a team effort here.
Yeah.
And that for me personally, I would have given it to Aerin Frankel, the goaltender of Boston, because I feel like the burden she had relative to everybody else on the ice was so much greater than any individual on that Minnesota team. I mean, Sophie Jakes had a breakout playoffs. The aforementioned Kendall Coyne-Schofield. There were so many offensive players that contributed here, but Aerin Frankel literally carried this Boston team on her back. And if you look at the playoff statistics, she faced 300 shots on goal in the playoffs, right? 169 more shots faced than Kristen Campbell, who was the next highest with 131.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we know that Toronto got booted, earlier. So that's wild. That is quite wild. And I think that it's rare in sports, Gil. We've seen it happen, but it's very rare in sports that we see someone from the losing team win. And I think there's a little bit, I remember being a part of we can say it now because this league doesn't exist, but in the PHF, we were having a walkthrough for what would end up being the last ever Isabel Cup final. And we were doing the walkthrough with the broadcast, and the broadcast at the time had very strong feelings. We have to pick we don't care who it is, but pick someone from the winning team. And I remember being like, well, I mean, shouldn't the MVP be the most valuable player?
It is rare. And I wonder, excuse me, I wonder if because this is the very first Walter Cup that they were a little more hesitant to sort of go outside the box and vote for someone from a team that didn't win.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I don't know where fans really stand on this. I know I certainly have my opinion. I think there's just some performances that head and shoulders above the rest, and it doesn't matter. You have to honor. That's what at least I believe these awards to be. And I think Aerin Frankel is a great example. But to your point, also Rachel, Michaela Cava, who has won an Isabel Cup championship with the Toronto Six. 8 points, tied with Taylor Heise. So do you appreciate goals more than assists? Maybe. Sophie Jakes Also, great storyline. And even for the drama, I maybe would have, if I was there voting as a media member, I might have given it to Sophie Jakes, who, as you may recall, Gil and Rachel, we talked about on this segment a while back, because she was a part of the first ever trade and got traded as it would be from Boston to Minnesota.
Imagine that.
Yes, imagine that. So overall, congratulations, Sticks Taps, to the PWHL. I mean, we talked about it. This was a sprint to get this thing going. And I think that there are definitely some things that were bumps in the road that will be hopefully fine-tuned and resurfaced, if you will. But there's also some things, I mean, the broadcast quality, just being able to find the games was something that was huge for women's hockey. And so what is next? Well, immediately, Rachel, we will have this team, PWHL New York CTLI, and I got to add an NJ in there, PWHL New York will have the first overall pick. And we talked about the draft is coming up, I should say, in a couple of weeks, in June. Yes, in June. I think it's over the 9th and 10th or 10th and 11th. Either way, they're doing a few things also with awards and whatnot. But it's going to be interesting to see if the PWHL New York team will name a coach before the draft. I think there's a lot of value added in doing that. It also sounded, and we talked about this on another segment before, that general manager Pascal Daou was not, he of course agreed it would be ideal, but it wasn't necessarily the most pressing thing. I think it sounded like the most pressing thing was finding the right coach. And, just hearing buzzes here and there, I think that even for some of the players that they want to bring back and retain beyond their contracts, you have some players that are on a 1-year contract, you have some players that were on a multi-year contract, getting the right coach and making sure that that team can stabilize at the top, I think is going to be critically important. So that's going to be one thing from a specific team market that we're looking at. Of course, the draft overall. Rachel, any names that stand out to you that you are curious to see where they end up?
Well, I mean, the biggest name is Amanda Castle.
Yes, that's right. And you want to talk about getting a coach for this team? I mean, Amanda Castle played for the Riveters in the NWHL. She never played in the PHF era. Has ties to the New York market, so that's huge. And I had always estimated and surmised that Kessel was kind of taking some time away from hockey because women's hockey has, let's just say, been through a lot. And Kessel's been there for a front seat, whether it's with the national team, with the leagues. She never really ever went to the CWHL when things kind of fell apart and other things. She's always kind of stayed in the New York market. So I think that's going to be interesting. But also, I think the number of players versus the number of spots is also interesting.
Right. So there's 167 players on the list for 42 spots in the 7-round draft. And this is not a new league anymore. So there's not, 8 open spots on each team.
No,
it's much, much smaller now because we have an established league. So, this feels very WNBA in terms of, maybe 6 to 8 draft picks get a regular spot on the roster for the season one, depending on skill level. Could be more than that, maybe 12 to 15. But that's about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that it makes it tough. And although on the one hand, you could see, Gil, that it makes it very elite. You could say that. However, we know that in elite level sports, at any level for any gender, there's also some politicking that goes on there. And some of them, right? I know. And then, in 2024, you also have to play the marketing game. And sometimes you get a player that the name maybe you think is, worth the squeeze, whereas they're not necessarily giving as much as they have in the past on the ice.
It happens. And yet, you have to sort of balance getting the best performance on the ice and selling tickets and selling jerseys and all of that stuff. So in the long run, you're probably better off putting the best team on the ice, but I could totally understand wanting to get, fans in the seats and sell merchandise. So how do you build your team and your league?
So I don't know where this is going to go, Gil, but we will have the updates here on the Women's Hockey Spotlight as part of the Locked On NHL show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Your team every day. Had to get that in. But yeah, no, it's an interesting story to keep an eye on, and we'll see where it goes. Erica, thank you as always. Great to have you here, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. I'm sure we'll have a lot of draft items to talk about.
Indeed. Thank you both.
So the Western Conference Final now knotted up at 2 games apiece. They will play Game 5 Friday night. And this, to me, has been a very, very fascinating series. A lot of close games, and the Oilers with a big comeback to tie it all up at 2 in Game 4.
Yeah, I think this was a huge game. Obviously, when you look at 7-game series, Game 4 is always a pivotal game, right? No matter where you are in the wins and losses, because it's the middle game. And I think that it was obviously extremely important for Edmonton to win this one, and they were able to. I think that in this case for Dallas, obviously they're still dealing with the Chris Tanev injury, and he blocked a shot and was out for the remainder of the game. Still no word as of recording if he's going to return tonight. That's huge. But at the same time, they have a lot of people stepping up. I hate to use like a foot analogy when it's his foot that was injured, but they do have a lot of depth on this team, and they should be able to get it done without it.
They should be. And, depth is one of the strengths of the Dallas Stars. And it will be interesting. Now, 2 of the potential final 3 games are in Dallas. I think that'll help the Stars a little bit. And, every game in this series so far has been close. You had a 1-goal game in Game 1, 2-goal margins in Games 2 and 3, but with an empty netter at the end. And then Game 4, down 2-0, you had a comeback by Edmonton. I get the feeling every game of this series is just going to be, very tight, very neck and neck.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick side note on the home ice thing. I don't know if you saw the watch party in Dallas where they had the projection on the ice using AI generated dots for the players, even though the game was in Edmonton. I thought that was really, really cool that they were able to do that. But that just shows how dedicated these fans are and how much of an advantage that building can be.
Yeah, no question about that. And, as far as Dallas is concerned, losing after having that 2-0 lead can certainly be devastating emotionally. How does this team bounce back? And I think in this instance, the home crowd will help them a little bit initially at the start of this game. But how do you bounce back emotionally from being up 2-0 and losing 5-2?
Yeah, I think this is just a matter of taking what you learned and methodically putting it into action for the next game and shutting down Edmonton and knowing that you can't let up, not for 1 second. Because I think that that's really what happened here, is that there was a little bit of a foot off the gas in that second period in the last game, and Edmonton was able to capitalize on that. So I think it's just a matter of reminding yourself, period by period, shift by shift, that this is it. This is a pivotal game in the series.
How much credit? I mean, not a lot of people talk about Stuart Skinner, but how much credit should he get for getting the Edmonton Oilers to this point?
Yeah, I think it's been huge. And Skinner has not been a goaltender that, has gotten a ton of praise over the years. He's been just an NHL goaltender, right? Hasn't been particularly bad, hasn't been particularly good. He's just an NHL goaltender, but he is proving himself in these playoffs to be more than that, because that has been such an Achilles heel of this team for so long. And to be able to rely on him enough that whatever you need to do offensively, you're getting done in order to be able to come back in the situation of game 4, in the situation in game 1, to be able to prevail in that double overtime game. So I think he's come up big, and I think it's been a surprise, but a very welcome surprise for the Oilers.
No doubt. I mean, going into this series, I think most people would have given the Stars with Jake Ottinger the edge in goal. So
Yeah.
far, it hasn't necessarily worked out that way.
No, not entirely, but I do think, if you look at the other side of things here, that, you have seen the emergence of Wyatt Johnson
Hmm.
on the Dallas Stars as just a bona fide star for lack of a better word, in these playoffs. And I just think that, it goes both ways here, where you see different players emerge than you might have seen in the regular season, or people, who've been, at it all season have stepped up their game even more in the playoffs. And I think that, both teams have guys who have taken the opportunity and run with it.
Yeah, no question. And then, the flip side of the guys who sort of step up and are unexpected, you want your best players to be your best players. And then there's Connor McDavid with 3 assists in game
Yeah.
4.
Yeah, and that's what's always so interesting about him, is that he can have the biggest impact of anybody on a game and not score a single goal.
Yeah.
And that is the thing that I think separates him from a lot of other players in this league, that his impact goes far beyond putting the puck in the net, which he also does at a remarkable pace and with tremendous skills. So
Yeah.
like, there's a reason why he's the best.
Yeah, no question about that. Should be a great series. And, by the end of the weekend, we may have a winner, or we may be setting ourselves up for a game 7. Should be great to watch. Some great hockey coming up this weekend. And now, Rachel, we know the schedule for the Stanley Cup Finals.
We do, and it is very long. That is the biggest reaction out there for this schedule, that the earliest, game 1 is gonna be Saturday, June 8th, so a week from tomorrow. Game 7, if it goes to that, would be Monday, June 24th. That
Yeah.
just seems excessive. It seems way too late into June, and I understand there's issues with travel and building availability and all of that, and I just think that it's still too much. It's still too much time in between.
I mean, you have the Monday game, then a Thursday game. There's a few situations where you're building in a 2 or 3 day gap in between games, and I always thought that sort of ruins the momentum of the series to a certain extent.
It does. I mean, you also have the complication of the Dallas Mavericks still being
Yeah,
in the NBA playoffs, so I'm sure that played into it. But nonetheless, this is like on June 24th. Do I want to be still thinking about this NHL season? Probably not. I bet there's some people who want to be at cottages by then.
yeah. Got to do the cottages, and obviously the draft is just going to be a few days after
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
potential game 7, so that is not going to be easy for sure. All right, well, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. That is going to do it for this episode of Locked On NHL. I will be back on Monday talking to 3 of our local hosts, talking about the biggest stories from around the NHL. Obviously, the 4 remaining teams will figure highly in that. Have a great weekend, everybody, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.